These bolts are the only ones that really gave me any trouble. After I moved that steering gear out of the way, I could pretty much get at everything. These ones you can see from the bottom, that's why I disconnected the drive shaft, but you can't get a good angle on them. So you actually have to go over the top of the engine, drop your wobble socket down with a big extension, and surprisingly none of mine broke. Hey guys, welcome back to the shop for another video. We got this Explorer. It's a 2014 twin turbo Ecoboost, so the 3.5, and we're putting a rear turbo in it. So I already got the old turbo out. We're gonna go over that, go over the new unit, and then hopefully this will help you if you have to do this job. You would just reverse the procedure to take it apart. So if that's what you're looking for, some info on how to help you do this job, because it can be a little intimidating. I hope this video helps you out. The reason I didn't film me taking it out was because I've been working on cars for almost 10 years now, but I actually haven't done one of these turbos. I've quoted them, but it's a really expensive job, and you can have a plethora of other issues aside from just your turbo. So we'll go over some of that. But that being said, I've never done one of these before, and as you know or could imagine, when you're filming, it just slows everything down. You lose focus. I really just wanted to focus and make sure that I could get it out of there in a timely fashion. It did take most of the day. This job as a whole wasn't quite as bad as I anticipated it being. It's not very fun. It is a lot of work, but I'll show you some of the things that I did just to kind of make it a little easier. So before we get into getting ready to put it all together, let's go take a look at what we did to make the removal process just a little bit easier. I'm gonna try to get you guys as best I could a shot at this. You can see that is where the turbo was sitting. There's a bracket right there. And then you can see one of two rubber tubes. There's a coolant line that's sitting up in there. So there's a lot of little stuff to take apart. Let's get under here better. All right, so we got this electronic steering gear kind of in the way. Look up right about there is where the turbo sits. You can see that. You can see that bracket that I was talking about again, but right here, so the first thing we did, and this can be a little intimidating, you could do it if you don't have a lift. Obviously it's a lot easier with a lift, but you can see we dropped the subframe in the back. So we took the bolts completely out of the back, and then I just cracked them loose in the front. So it's not going anywhere. Then we also disconnected the drive shaft. You wouldn't need to do this. I'll tell you why we did in just a minute. And then we disconnected this mount on the transmission that just goes through the cradle. So there's one bolt there. Exhaust normally isn't this low. It's just because we have the rear of this cradle dropped. And again, you can see one bolt there. We just cracked it loose to get a little bit more angle out of the back of the frame. And then there's one right there. So then what I did first is I disconnected this steering rack completely from the vehicle. It's not too hard. You got a couple electrical connectors here. This is an electronic rack. So you disconnect the outer tie rod ends, drop those out of the knuckle right there. And then there's two bolts underneath. One goes here and one goes there. So you take those out, this whole thing will wiggle. And then right over here, there's a 10 mil bolt that connects the gear to the steering shaft. So you got that bolt, the two on the bottom, and your outer tie rods. So, and then obviously I didn't remove this completely from the vehicle, but as it sits, this whole motor assembly sits right in front of the turbo, and it just makes things a lot harder to get to. So I disconnected it just so I could move it out of the way. So I left it obviously in the car. It's just completely disconnected so I can move it. And then I did remove the sway bar. Again, didn't take it out. So I took these brackets off the sway bar. There's a bolt on the back and one on the front and a bushing in there. I took that out and disconnected the sway bar end links just to make it a little easier to move around. So just a couple more things to show you before we go over to the old unit and the new unit, being the turbo that's going on. You just saw the catalytic converter, and that might seem a little odd, running lacquer thinner through the cat. So amazingly, and when we talk about the failure on this turbo, you'll see why, but the honeycomb inside the cat looked really good. The vehicle didn't have any converter codes, anything like that, but when I pulled the cat off, oil just seeped out of it. I mean, not even seeped, it like poured out of the cat. So there's an old mechanics trick, and you can actually take a gallon of lacquer thinner and they tell you to put it in the gas tank. I've seen it work multiple times. What it does is when it burns, it cleans out the cat. Modern vehicles, direct injection, turbo, I do not trust that at all. I had to remove the cat anyway, so I just ran lacquer thinner through it a few times, got some of that gunk out, tried to clean it out a little bit. I'll end with some acetone, and then hopefully that'll be okay. The customer does know that you could potentially have a cat code in the future. future because this thing was absolutely oil soaked. So it had a lot of contamination with engine oil. Let's go over to the bench and talk about the new turbo and the failure on the old turbo. All right, really quick before we do that, you can see I got all the old gaskets laid out, and then I just used this Permatex copper spray gasket. This is really, really good stuff. Used it quite often at my time at Toyota. It's just a really great product. So if you're in a pinch and you need to reuse a gasket, this stuff is great. We did get new gaskets. That's for a coolant line, that's for an oil return line, that goes on the top of the turbo, that goes on the catalytic converter. These two are the only two that we didn't get. So these are just exhaust pipe gaskets. So I coated them. I'm going to coat them a few more times just to ensure we don't have any leaks. These ones, we got new ones. So we got new ones for the turbo and the cat and the oil feed and stuff like that. But just to cover my butt in case one of the new aftermarket gaskets is bad, I did label them all and cover them in the copper gasket maker. All right, so right on the bench here we have the old turbo, and then we also have the new unit in the box. So we'll show you the failure, and then we'll show you what comes in the box with the new unit. All right, so here's the original turbo, and you can see this thing got absolutely ground up. Look at the shaft play in there. This thing is horrible. So I'm gonna shine some light in there. Can you see what's missing? What's missing on that turbo? The nut for the end of the shaft on the turbine there, it's completely gone. So my suspicion is that when that came off, that's why the fins on the turbine look like that, because it ate it. And amazingly, it ground it completely up because I didn't find it in the cat. There was no damage in the cat. That being said, that is still metal shavings, and I do not like that at all. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens there, but you can see that that got completely destroyed. And then if we flip this guy over, here is the hot side. Look at the turbine on that side. Wiggle, wiggle. Just about can pull it out of there. Not quite. But that would have been bad because that would have went right into the cat. This is where your cat bolts on, and it would have absolutely destroyed the cat. So, yeah, really close to complete detonation. Although I would classify this as 100% complete failure. It almost completely grenaded, and if this would have came apart, that would have been bad news bears, because then you're for sure replacing an expensive cat. Looking at this unit, this guy kind of sucks. We'll go over this when we put it back together. This is your oil feed line. This actually has like an AC or fuel disconnect fitting that you have to use. It goes right into the block, and then there's actually a filter in here that filters your oil. So everything that I read and researching this job said you do not want to reuse this. You want to get a new one because this filters your oil, and if there's, you know, any contamination, anything like that, any shavings up in here, there goes your new turbo. So we're going to replace this with a brand new one on our new unit here. And then these bolts are the only ones that really gave me any trouble. After I moved that steering gear out of the way, I could pretty much get at everything. These ones you can see from the bottom. That's why I disconnected the drive shaft, but you can't get a good angle on them. So you actually have to go over the top of the engine, drop your wobble socket down with a big extension. And surprisingly, none of mine broke. I did whack my thumb really good, but they all came off with a breaker bar and a pipe on the end. So got that off. Little rubber hose you disconnect here. Rubber tube goes on the end here. Rubber tube goes on the end there. And then the only other things you have to disconnect is your oil return line. That's just two, I believe they were 8 or 9 millimeters. And then these are two coolant lines that just have a banjo bolt going through them. So once you move the steering gear and the sway bar out of the way, drop that cradle down, all this stuff is pretty accessible, minus those guys, which you have to get from the top, and they're very tight. So let's get this one out here, see what we got with the new one. New gaskets. I'm going to set you down and unbag this. All right, so here's our new turbo unit. This is from Dorman. This is not a Ford part, and Dorman, like I said, hit or miss. So it got pretty good reviews. Customer actually supplied this, so no warranty on my end. You know, you supply your own parts. I'm not going to warranty it because I'll get shafted on the warranty time. That being said, it looks like a pretty good unit. Here's all the new gaskets I was talking about, and here's precisely what I meant. So this is for the oil return, and that's just a paper gasket. I'm not going to be using that. I'm going to use the metal gasket that was in there that I put some copper coat on. These guys are nice metal gaskets I'll reuse. These are for the coolant lines, and that's for the oil feed line, which I got some from Ford, so I'll have extras. I don't know why they sent me these really cheap, sketchy looking gloves, and I don't know what this syringe is about. So I'm going to read the turbo installation notice, see what that's about, see if there's anything that they want me to do, and then we'll get to installing this guy. All right, so this is the part that's going to show you everything you need to know to do this. Again, I'm starting from putting it back together. I took it all apart yesterday. You can see up there, there's one of the gaskets we're reusing. That goes from the manifold right to the turbo. Reason we're reusing it is, I don't know if you can see, I'll try to zoom, but see the little fingers? They hold it on there. And the new gasket, which is Chinese, not Ford, but it doesn't have those little fingers, and it's hard enough to get up there anyway. Those bolts, once we get them started, we're gonna have to go to the top of the engine and tighten them from up there. But we're just gonna hang the turbo right there. Then we got our two rubber hoses that we have to connect. You can see a coolant line right there, coolant line there. The oil return is right here, this shiny new hose right there that's kind of just tucked out of the way. And then, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see it. See by that O2 sensor connector there? That is where the oil feed line goes in. So that's where you have that quick disconnect fitting. You're gonna have to use a 3/8 fuel line disconnect, AC line disconnect to get at. So I'm gonna put this turbo in here. I'm gonna try to get you a decent view. We're just gonna get it kind of mocked up, and then we'll get to hooking everything else up. This is what our new turbocharger looks like, all ready to go. We just had to transfer this heat shield, and then it doesn't come with new studs. These ones are a little longer, but this is where the catalytic converter and the exhaust bolt up. So I just went down to AutoZone, got some studs for the exhaust, ran those in because the old ones, I got two of them to come out. One of them, the nut for the exhaust stayed on there, and it came out kind of like a bolt, and I couldn't get it apart. So replaced those, and then this guy, this is your oil feed line. This is that quick connect fitting, and it just has a star bit on top of there with two copper washers. The rest of these plugs, so these are for your coolant, that's for the return, and then the rubber hoses go on those two. I'm going to leave those on until I get it up in there, because your turbo is a really sensitive system. You don't want to get any dirt or debris in there, so once we get it up, then as we start connecting stuff, we'll take these apart one at a time. I don't expect you guys to be able to see this, but this is how you have to get those 3 bolts for the turbo onto the manifold. So reach around with the long extension. You can't really see what you're doing. Got to feel around. It's not too hard to lay on the top of the engine and get the bolts started. It's tightening them that sucks. All right, so like I said, we got the hold downs back on the sway bar, and then there's 4 connectors that you connect back up on the electronic steering gear. So 4 right behind there. You can only really see the one. There's a ground and an 8mm bolt holding that bracket on, and now we can slide this back into place. And again, there's only 2 bolts, 1, 2 right there. So we just kind of got to wiggle and slide this around until we get it lined up. You can see right there, that's an O2 sensor connector. There's one over here somewhere. We got to bolt the cat to the turbo. You can see the studs, the shiny new studs right there. And then we have to get the steering shaft reconnected over there. So I'm going to wiggle this steering gear into place, start the bolts, and then we'll work on the cradle. All right, so now to get the cradle lined up, you can see right up there, there's kind of a spacer shim on the cradle. So make sure you don't forget to put that back in if you took it out. The hole's right there, and the way we did this is we have to raise it back up, right? So I tightened the front, and that gave me a little, but not enough to get the bolt started. So then, you know, if you don't have a lift, you're doing it with a jack stand, you could do this with a jack. I just put this piece of wood under here and lowered the car down to lift it up so that I could start this bolt. So let's see if I can do this one-handed so you can see. Put it in there, just like that. Get a few turns, just try to get it started. Okay, so it started, and then, is that the wrong one? That's the wrong one, hold on. All right, learn from my mistake here, guys. Leave your cradle a little bit loose until you get this CAD in there. So I did have to take it back loose again, not a big deal. Get this in, there's 3 bolts on the other side onto the turbo. Then this piece and we're done, we can add fluids. And that's it, guys. She's done and running. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see it. See that smoke coming off? Don't be alarmed. You got a brand new part in there and there's new paint and stuff like that. So just let it idle off for a little bit. Got this one done.